So, having stuck our piece of coloured faux leather to the reverse of our main exterior faux leather, we're now going to stitch it in place. So I'm going to use a long thread top and bottom, and I'm just going to very, very slowly stitch this in place. And I'm probably not going to show you the whole thing because it'll take me a while and it'll drive you nuts because it's incredibly boring. And I go quite slow, and I do tend to stop talking when I'm doing it because I'm concentrating. Now, the one thing that I do like to use is a stiletto, and I use that on the very thin parts just to kind of hold them in place to stop them from stretching at all. The glue will stop them stretching a little, but the stiletto just kind of holds it in place. And I just put the stiletto just in front of my Teflon foot. Now, I am using a Teflon foot. I'm using Coats Moon thread, and my stitch length is just less than 3. And I keep it at just less than 3 because... where's my foot pedal? Because I want it to curve around the curves of this. I don't want it to be too angular. So I'm not back stitching at the beginning, because back stitching at the beginning will cause a thickness which I don't want. I'm literally doing a couple of stitches, moving my foot, lifting my foot up, and I am lifting my foot, but you can't see me doing it on the thingy because I've got a knee lift. So I'm just lifting my foot and turning my work slightly. Well, that went a bit quicker than I was expecting it to. Now, if your Teflon foot is particularly large, you may find it's easier to use one of those clear plastic feet. I'm stitching approximately 1/8 of an inch away from the very edge of the cutout, so I often have to lift my foot to just check where I'm going. Now, around this top bit where it's quite detailed and quite tiny, I'm literally going to hand crank round because I just want to do one stitch at a time and I want to have absolute control. So literally just one stitch, raise the foot, turn, needle back in again, just see where I'm going. That's it. Might be easier if I put the stiletto down to turn this hand cranking. There's no shame in hand cranking. I do it quite a lot if I've got really tight spaces to go around. And this little bit at the top of the stamen is very dainty, very delicate. So to get it nicely stitched in place, hand cranking one stitch at a time is definitely the way forwards. Unless you're somebody that feels they have absolute control of their machine and they can do one stitch at a time. I mean, I usually think I'm pretty good, but I just feel more confident just doing this like this. And it just gets me around this particularly fiddly little shape that's at the top of the stamen there. So there we go, we're now back to I'm just lining myself up, and we're going to just slowly come around and down the other side there. Doesn't matter which sort of bits you do first, you do which bits you want to first. It's not there's no right or wrong. I think I tend to just, I don't know, I don't think I have an order. These little zigzaggy bits in the middle are quite delicate, so if you feel you need to do them one stitch at a time, hand cranking. Need to go in another stitch. It is fiddly, but the finished effect is really worth it. Raise my foot up so I can see where I'm going. And get back to where I started. So I've gone all the way around. So I'm back to where I started. So I raise my needle, pull my work away. Whoops, let's not lose that. Pull my work out from underneath, cutting long threads at the end, and I'm going to basically take these threads that are on the top, thread them onto, I'm using a self-threading needle. You can use an ordinary needle and do them one at a time. I just use a self-threading needle because they are what I prefer. And I'm taking those threads from the front to the reverse of my work. So I'm burying my threads so we don't have any double threads at all. I've got an extra thread there that's caught that just needs to be pulled out so I can tie it in. So I take my threads from the bobbin and my threads from the top that I've just pulled through, and tie them off. So just 2 or 3 little knots, and then take down to about 1/2 inch. And that's my first part sewn in. So now I'm going to make sure I've got long threads top and bottom so that I can start my stitching again. And I'm going to stitch around the next part now. I'm not going to do all of this to camera simply because you'll be asleep before I've finished. But you've got the idea. So I've lowered my foot in at the place where I want to start, and I'm just going to go around the other sort of petals now. So you can see it's a bit like driving. You've got your foot on the accelerator, and your foot lift is your sort of clutch. So you're kind of moving between one and the other. To give yourself that sort of freedom to... Let's come like that. That's it. It's a really good exercise in controlling the foot pedal on your machine. to do one stitch at a time, and some machines don't have as good kind of control. And this is 1600 stitches a minute, so it goes pretty fast when it's in full speed, but it does have the capacity to do one stitch at a time, which is great. And I think that's to do, I think once you know your machine, it becomes kind of part of you almost. It's like your arm, and you know how much pressure to put on the foot pedal to get what you want. I get back to where my stitching started. Well, it's not where it started, but where the other line of stitching was. Again, removing from the under the foot, taking my thread ends from the top, and just literally going through the next stitch hole so that you've got no back stitching showing at all, which just looks unattractive. You know your stitching is going to show on this. Now, if you're not confident that you can do this well, or you're worried that it's the first time you've ever tried it, use a self-coloured thread. So use a thread that is the same colour as your exterior fabric, and your stitching will sort of hide into your fabric, so it's not quite as essential that you're absolutely perfect. If you're feeling brave, go for a contrast stitch. So again, we've got the front, the thread from the front, the thread from the back, and I'm just going to tie those off. Anybody that's already done some of my patterns will know that I do this a lot, and whilst it drives some people completely batty because it does take a lot of time, the finished effect is so much nicer without big bits of back stitching. Also, if you're working with faux leather, back stitching will weaken it, and you do have to be aware of that. Okay, so now I'm going to do the next part, and I will come back to you once I've done all of this, and we'll have a little look at what we can do with these pieces that we've got left over. So the bits that we cut out, we don't throw those away, we can use those. So I'm going to do so, and I'll show you how. So I'm just going to carry on with this, and I'll come back to you with how we're going to use those.